Good evening, everyone. It's very crowded, so we now are not letting anyone else in because we're at capacity. Plus, we're out of jail. Anyway, welcome to the Senate Presents tonight. I have two announcements to make before we start. Next Wednesday, our Eastman resident Ned Strong will be here. And he's doing a program entitled The Source of the Mighty Amazon. Ned was director of the Harvard David Rockefeller Center of Latin American Studies until 2019. And he said they had a group of experts that went up 15,000 feet, and they mapped the source of the streams that fed the longest river in the world. And his presentation is the story of that exploration, so that should be very interesting. The next Wednesday, May 17th, we have a program that's also being co-sponsored by Sustainable Eastman and the Eastman Charitable Foundation. And ecologist Michael Caduto will be here. And it's kind of a unique Senate Presents program because it's divided into two programs, one in the afternoon and one in the evening. The afternoon one, he will take people on a journey around the buffers of Eastman Lake. The program is entitled Exploring Riparian Buffers, and they are very critical to our environment. They separate the terrestrial from the aquatic, and they are very important. He will point them out to people, and also anyone who lives on the waterfront, help them understand how to keep them healthy. And in the evening, he will do another informative program on buffers, and this one, though, will be told through storytelling and music and a PowerPoint presentation. He will try to have people understand the stewardship of buffers and how important they are. He also, for you that have children, wrote a children's book about buffers. So anyway, so tonight I would like to start our program by announcing we have two biologists from New Hampshire Fish and Game. The title of the program, I'm sure you all know, is Bears and Their Behavior, and the misconceptions and the challenges that the bears face. They are going to be focusing on the factors that create bear-human conflict, and also they're going to be telling us about how to mitigate those factors. So they're going to be talking for 45 to 50 minutes, and they are both experts on the subject, and there will be no questions allowed until the program is finished. And then there will be plenty of time for questions. We do ask that each person ask only one question to be fair to the amount of people who are here. And I have something else to say. Oh, Lori is recording this program, so you all know that. We got permission from them to record it. I know I'm missing something, but I forget. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it, and I will introduce the program and the biologist, Andrew Timmins, okay? He is a wildlife biologist. He's been with Fish and Game for 28 years. I don't think he looks older than that. And he has been a bear biologist for 20. He's now the Games Programs Supervisor. Okay. And then we have Dan Bailey, who is a wildlife biologist. And they are both experts. We should learn a lot tonight, so please welcome them.
Can everybody hear me okay on this?
Mm-hmm.
What's the vote vote on people. Do you want the lights off for the presentation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Keep going.
Thank you for the invite tonight. Very impressive crowd. This is one of the larger crowds I think we've had for bear talk in a while. And I think the impetus for this talk is, I think some bear activity began here late last summer, early fall. It's the first, I've been handling bear-human conflicts for about 21 years, and Dan's been doing it for 5 to 6 years. And it's to our knowledge, it's the first time either one of us have ever taken calls from Eastman. I wasn't familiar with the facility. I live and work mostly in the northern part of the state. Is this not working?
Yeah, it's on.
Do I need to be closer? So, we haven't spent a lot of time here at Eastman, and that tells me that historically there hasn't been a lot of bear-human conflicts here at Eastman, which is good. But obviously with some activity last fall, folks reached out to the department asking about the possibility of getting some assistance. So this kind of led to this talk. So we're going to move right along in our talk tonight. Because I know there's a lot of questions. I've seen a sheet of a lot of well thought out questions. So we're going to try to motor through this and leave a lot of available time for people to ask questions at the end. But I'm going to start off talking about bear population management because it really kind of is a lead into bear-human conflict management. So we manage bears statewide, but we break up their management by regions. We have 6 bear management regions in the state, and each one of these regions has a bear population objective which is developed by the public. The wildlife in Hampshire belong to the public, and it's our job as managers to manage those wildlife populations at levels desired by the public. So this includes both the non-hunting public as well as the hunting public. So each one of these regions has its own specific bear population objective, and we strive to keep the population at that objective. And this shows you what the bear population has done over time in New Hampshire. The green line that kind of changes periodically, that's the estimated bear population size over time. And the red line is the target objective over time as specified in 10-year bear management plan. So, during the 90s was a period of bear conservation. We were trying to grow bear populations in the state from a level of 3,000. And at the time, the objective was set right around 3,000. Then during that second management plan, the population statewide objective was raised to around 5,000, and we did that. And then the population kept growing. And during the last 10-year management plan, for the first time, is when the public desired lower numbers of bears in certain parts of the state. And you can see that once that population objective lowered, and the fact that the population kept growing, it's created this greater deficit between the two. But the reality of it is our bear populations in New Hampshire, whether or not they're above or below these specified goals, they're pretty much on track with bears in neighboring states. Anywhere in New Hampshire where you live, you're going to have anywhere between half a bear per square mile and 1 bear per square mile. And realistically, that is, bears are managed based on social carrying capacity more than biological carrying capacity. From a habitat perspective, we could have higher bear densities, but from a social perspective, generally we want to keep the populations below these maximum levels that the habitat could support, because in the end, we want people to appreciate and be happy with the number of bears on the landscape. And the way we manage bear populations is through annual bear hunting. We rely on a certain amount of annual mortality on our bear population in order to keep those populations at the desired objectives. And this is what bear hunting has done over time in New Hampshire. You know, as bear populations grew, interest in bear hunting grew, and we've seen increasing harvest over time. You will notice that harvest from one year to the next really varies a lot. You know, we can take 500 bears one year and take over 1,000 bears the next year, and this is the theme we'll talk a lot about tonight in different aspects of this talk. But the vulnerability of bears to hunter harvest, as well as the vulnerability of bears to get into conflicts, is really driven by animal food abundance. You know, on years when natural foods are abundant, we see a lot less conflicts and we see lower bear harvest. On years when foods are really absent on the landscape, bears are more vulnerable. And last year marked a very poor food year. It marked a very high bear harvest and also resulted in an above average year for bear-human conflicts. But that it's not the case every year. But we're really dependent on Mother Nature and the amount of food resources she provides. The other thing we're noticing is, as we think back to the population graph, as we increase harvest, we're not necessarily seeing a response in the bear population size. It also continues to grow. And that's caused us to look at some data and start asking some questions. And what we've noticed is that this is the number of sows in the population that had cubs in a given year. And we're seeing that the number of females having cubs is increasing over time. And we have some concerns about that, and we believe that that's maybe related to the fact that bears are having increased access to human-related food. So on those years when natural foods are poor, which would result in depressed reproduction of bears, we're seeing bears even on poor food years have 3, 4 cub litters, and something's going on. And I think what's going on is human-related foods on the landscape are providing a buffer. So it's something we're looking at. But I want to get into, the real focus tonight is about living with bears, coexisting with bears, minimizing conflicts with bears. And, you know, when we meet with the public to discuss bear issues and try to help resolve bear issues, it really comes down, what we rely on is the public to be willing to make some changes on their end. You know, that's the only way we're going to accomplish this. And a person's willingness to change their own behavior really depends on their values, whether or not they value wildlife and whether or not they are willing to take on increased responsibility, change their own behaviors in order to coexist with wildlife. And we see this vary depending on the species. You know, public opinion of species like deer and moose are usually very high, but public opinion of these other species that have paws and claws often are a little lower. You know, people feel threatened by species that have the ability to, you know, kill chickens or to kill livestock. You know, species such as coyote, fisher, bears fall into this. You know, people's appreciation and opinions of wildlife really play a big role in our ability to get people to kind of self-reflect and change their own behavior. And when it comes to bears, we see the gamut as far as public opinion. We see people who idolize bears, think very highly of bears. We see people who feed bears. But we also see people who do terrible things to bears. This was an orphan cub that was picked up and brought to our rehab facility. It ultimately died. And this is an x-ray, and that little dot at the end of the arrow is a BB. So, you know, this cub was out on the landscape, probably, you know, was desperate for food, probably showed up at somebody's bird feeder, and the homeowner shot it with a BB gun. So, you know, bears face some real challenges on our landscape. So, we're going to talk about bear-human conflicts in New Hampshire, and you know, trends over time, and we're going to move into what we're attempting to do about it. So, conflict trends in New Hampshire. So, documented conflicts between bears and people have grown over time. That's no surprise. But it doesn't have quite the same trajectory as that harvest graph I showed earlier. So, in the early 90s, as bear populations were growing, we saw an increasing number of bear-human conflicts. You know, bears were somewhat new to the landscape. You know, New Hampshire never lost its bear population, but it got extremely low during the late 1800s and early 1900s due to year-round killing of bears. So during the era of conservation, as we started to grow these bear populations, you know, we saw an increasing trend in conflicts, which makes sense. You know, people didn't know how to live with bears. And then around 2000 until present time, although that annual number of complaints has been highly variable, it hasn't changed a lot. We have about the same number of annual bear-human conflicts now that we did back in the early 1990s, but there are some real differences. Back then we had 3,000 bears. Now we have around 6,800 bears, so over double the number of bears. The human population back in the 90s was around 1 million people. Now it's 1.3 million people, so more bears, a lot more people, but not necessarily an increase in overall number of annual bear complaints. And that's because of education and in the work that we've done in the public's willingness to change some of their behaviors. So I'm going to show a video here. So this is a bear family from northern New Hampshire. This was a bear family that was attracted to a residential area. Smaller than this, probably a little more dense in the number of people, but a lot of people, a very tourist-based community. And what happened is people started feeding these bears, people started allowing these bears to get access to human foods. The behavior started with her going house to house, kind of looking for handouts, but escalated into her going into over 60 condominiums in the course of 2 summers. So, you know, when things like that happen, that is behavior that bears form because we as a public allow them to do so. But when it gets to that point, it puts managers like myself and Dan in tough situations. And too often, we have to respond to some of these bears by removing them from the population. You know, their behaviors become so deteriorated by people that there's no other option for these animals, and it's not how we want to manage our bears in New Hampshire. So I'm going to jump into causes of bear-human conflicts. A bear is essentially a stomach with 4 legs. Everything a bear does in the course of the year is about acquiring food, preferably high-quality food. This time of year, bears have just come out of the denning period. They've been living off what fat reserves they were able to put on last fall, which wasn't great because of the poor food. They're hungry. There's not a lot of food on the landscape right now, particularly with this extended wet weather. So bears are trying to bulk back up on the fat reserves that they use during the summer months. During the winter months. As we move into the summer, hopefully we start getting fruit crops. You know, in June, hopefully we start getting blueberry crops, followed by raspberry crops, and then blackberries. And when those conditions are right, bears do well, and those are the years we have reduced conflicts. But when you get years, but that's not the case every year. Mother Nature's not consistent. The last 2 years have been very droughty. We have not seen good summer berry crops. So bears have been kind of desperate for food. And, you know, it's just a reminder that these animals, you know, their preference would be to be feeding on natural foods in more remote areas. But if those natural foods aren't available, they're going to supplement in backyards. And as a result, the ability for bears to access human-related foods becomes a significant driver in bear-human conflicts. So these conflicts are really occurring during the summer months. You know, our conflict bear season really runs around from May to about July or August. And again, it depends on a lot of things. It depends on food resources, but this is also linked to when are people coming to New Hampshire to recreate? You know, when are people filling campgrounds? When are people on vacation, going to restaurants? You know, when is the Lakes region booming with tourism and the resulting human-related food? So, you know, there's a link. There's a link between the amount of natural foods during the time period, but there's also a strong link to when people are here and when people are generating bear attractants. And there's a lot going on in this graph, but it's pretty simple, and it kind of simplifies the summer diet of a black bear. But what this is comparing is the number of annual complaints, bear-human conflicts, to the production score of raspberries. So in raspberries, you know, a 9 or 10 would be a great crop, a 0 would be a absent crop. So what you can see is there's a real correlation between these summer berry crops in conflicts. You know, it's fairly simplistic and straightforward, but I think this graph kind of visualizes it good. And it's very immediate. You know, when we don't have those summer foods for bears, we see these spikes in conflicts. And as far as regions, you know, wherever you live in the state of New Hampshire, you're living in bear country. You're apt to have, you're apt to see bears, whether you're down close to the seacoast or in the farther northern part of the state. But bear densities do change from one area to the next, but so do human densities. So where we see our greatest number of bear-human conflicts is in our White Mountains region and the Central region. It is the two regions of the state with the highest bear density, but it's also those areas of the state that I was referring to that are very linked to tourism. You know, the human population in these areas can really increase during the summer months. And what's causing conflicts? You know, if you listen to the department and follow our education materials, we harp on three things: bird feeders, unsecured garbage, and unprotected chickens. And the reason is those are the real drivers in annual bear conflicts. You know, if we could address those three sources, you know, if we could convince people to take their bird feeders down by April 1 and not put them back up to December 1st, you know, we could remove a big piece of those annual conflicts related to bird feeders. But the biggie is garbage. You know, there's a lot of unsecured garbage in the state of New Hampshire, and it's an easily accessible food source for bears. New Hampshire is recognized as the fastest growing state in terms of human population, and this data was pre-COVID. COVID kind of changed everything, so that's really been sped up. So we have a lot of people moving into the state of New Hampshire over the last few years that just haven't come from areas where they lived with bears. So, you know, you think about the increase in complaints back in the early 90s, you know, bears were somewhat new and novel on the landscape. People didn't know how to live with them. We're kind of seeing the same thing in more recent years as our population in New Hampshire, as our human population is changing. So it's all part of it. And as people move here, you know, we're running out of places to build homes, and we're seeing people build deeper into the forest. And what's happening is it's putting people in closer proximity to where bears live. And when you increase that interface, you increase the chance of having some kind of a interaction with a bear in terms of a conflict. But then you add one of these in the backyard. And if you want to see bears, put a bird feeder up there in the summer, because, you know, from a nutritional standpoint, bears can't not take advantage of bird feeders. So you know, remember, bears are trying to regain that body weight they lost during the denning season. You know, their spring and summer diet is vegetative, so and it moves into berries. So that's a diet that's high in sugar, but low in fat and protein. Then you add black oil sunflower seed, which is probably one of the most nutritional food items ever invented for wildlife, and you know, it's a game changer. So bears are hardwired to find high quality food, and if a bird feeder full of seed becomes available, they're going to take advantage of it, and they're going to target that. And we're also seeing an increase in people feeding bears. We passed a rule back in 2006 that made it illegal to feed bears in New Hampshire, and that rule has been helpful in deterring some of the activity, but you'd be amazed by how many people start feeding bears in New Hampshire. Probably the most severe one I dealt with in my career was in the town of Warren, where a group of people were feeding what ended up being close to 30 bears for over 20 years. And, you know, you can imagine the conflicts and the issues that created. You know, bears think very highly of people who provide them food. When a bear comes into your yard, you know, it's waiting to be told that it shouldn't be there. But if you reward them with food, that sends the message that they're welcome, and it just builds on that behavior and causes bears just to become more comfortable. But there's another type of feeding that goes on, and that's inadvertent feeding. You know, that's food that's being put out on the landscape, not intended for bears, intended for species such as bird. But at the end of the day, if you're gonna run a cafeteria, you can't pick and choose which animals are coming to. So these animals, you know, it doesn't matter whether the food's put out intentionally or unintentionally, its impact on the bear is the same. It builds this emboldened behavior and causes bears to become increasingly comfortable in being in residential areas. Bears have an excellent sense of smell. You know, the stinky garbage can that's in your shed, you may think is off limits to a bear. You don't think there's any way a bear could get in it, but if they can smell it, they can get it. You know, these animals are built to, you know, if you go out in the woods and you find a log that's all ripped apart, you know, that was done by a bear, because most of their animal protein comes in the form of colonial insects. They eat the larvae of hornets and ants. You know, it's a big part of their annual diet. So they're good at tearing things apart to get at food. So, you know, the same thing can happen to a shed door if garbage is not properly stored. And we see the behavior passed down through the generations. You know, when these females bring their cubs into these type of environments and start teaching these cubs these type of feeding behavior, that can be hard to change. You know, those cubs are learning that behavior, and they'll carry that behavior into their sub-adult and then adulthood. So, you know, it's learned behavior, and it's generational, and it's passed on through generations of bears. Bears don't belong around people, and when they start hanging out around people and they start hanging out in our environments, they have a shorter lifespan. You know, it's just reality. You know, we have a lot of roads, a lot of high-speed roads in the state of New Hampshire. 89 is a great example. A lot of bears get hit during the year on Interstate 89. So when bears get lured into our environments, they run the risk of getting killed. So we've talked behavior, but what else is going on? You know, how is this impact? How is allowing bears access to high-quality human foods impacting their physiology? Well, we're seeing bears get bigger. We're seeing these a typical female bear in New Hampshire generally weighs around 150 to 175 pounds, depending on the time of year. But we're seeing these female bears that are 250 to 300 pounds, and the size of a bear and the amount of food that a bear has access to plays a big role in their reproductive success. So we're starting to see these females that are having larger litter sizes. In New Hampshire, you know, a female bear gets bred for her first time generally between the ages of 3.5 and 5.5. And on her first litter, she'll usually have a single cub. And then on subsequent litters, she'll have 2 or 3 cubs. But we're seeing sows with 4 cubs, with 5 cubs. And where we're seeing this is in areas where bears have a lot of access to food. So, you know, think about our management objectives. You know, we're trying to either stabilize bear populations or reduce them. So increasing this reproductive rate is not helpful. So I'm now going to turn it. I'm not quite at that spot, am I? Sorry. Now we're going to talk about bear-human conflict management, and you know, this is where we're really going to get into what we're doing as an agency. This is a very common call during the summer. People are having issues with bears. They want the state to come relocate the bear. But I'm here to tell you that relocation is not the answer. And because of its failure rate, it's really not a tool that the department is using anymore. And I'll explain why. So this is the map of a relatively,
Yeah.
a bear that you may have read about in the news a couple of years ago. You know, their politics got involved, and, you know, we ended up moving this bear from Hanover, New Hampshire to the northern part of the state, despite our recommendations that it wouldn't be successful, because we've had experience with this. Bears have great homing tendencies. You know, they have the ability to get back to their home range very easily. If they don't get back to their home range, what they might do is go to another community that has similar food resources and repeat the behavior. So, you know, this is why we're not moving bears around the landscape. It's really a poor surrogate to trying to resolve bear-human conflicts. And Dan, I'm gonna pass it over to Dan now. We're gonna start getting into things that folks can do to help resolve issues.
Can everyone hear me? All right, so I'm going to touch a bit on bear-human conflict management in New Hampshire. And then to start that, I want to take a minute to talk about this unique partnership that New Hampshire Fish and Game has with our partner agency, federal agency, which is USDA Wildlife Services. So we've had a long-standing cooperative agreement with Wildlife Services that dates back to 1986. This was the first agreement of its kind. Wildlife Services every year gets a earmarked set of federal funds, and with those funds they're able to actually hire 2 seasonal bear technicians, which offsets our workload as an agency. It helps the constituents of New Hampshire because they serve as first responders when these conflicts arise. As well, as part of this agreement, they also got a set of funds that we use to purchase conflict abatement supplies annually. And we then have an equipment loan program that our 2 agencies, basically together, we loan out equipment using our bear technicians and our staff, our biologists from both agencies, to mitigate conflicts as they arise. So the goal of the program is to reduce and prevent human-bear conflicts through education and awareness, technical assistance, promoting long-term and lasting solutions, and promoting coexistence with bear. So here's some of our educational materials. Some of this is in the back of the room for you guys to take home. A lot of this, you know, there's different educational materials for every group of people. So we have camper cards, we have, you know, what to do when you're in bear country signs. This is for, you know, large complexes like this, as well as a lot of campgrounds throughout the state. People, like Andy talked about, we have a large influx of summer tourism here, especially in the Central and White Mountains region. These people are coming in, they may not be bear aware, they may not be from an area where bear are common, so it gives them quick tips that are helpful to, you know what to do when they encounter bear, and also how to keep food attractants away. We've also been working in recent years on, as Andy touched on, backyard poultry is our second leading cause of conflicts in the state. So we've developed this Raising Poultry in New Hampshire pamphlet that goes out annually to all our feed and grain stores, because they're the ones that are selling chicks in the spring. We then ask them to give them these pamphlets with the people who are coming in and purchasing chicks. It talks a lot about electric fencing supplies and what they can do to prevent conflicts. So education is a big part of, you know, what we do to prevent conflicts. You know, and it helps give people awareness, helps them take responsibility, you know, for their own resources, and teaches tolerance. Here's a breakdown or a graph showing the distribution of bear requests for assistance and who handled them in New Hampshire last year. And as I talked about, we have this unique partnership between USDA Wildlife Services, so it helps us to offset our workload, and we can respond to conflicts a lot quicker. So as you can see, our New Hampshire Fish and Game bear technicians, we hire 1 bear technician annually. USDA hires 2. Our New Hampshire Fish and Game biologists, our wildlife staff, Andy and myself, and our regional biologists, and then biologists over at USDA Wildlife Services. So together we offset, you know, deal with these conflicts as they arise in a timely manner. You can also see that our local conservation officers, they may be the first point of contact. People may call dispatch and get an officer, but then they are passing those calls to us so that we can respond to them. So I'll talk a bit about our equipment loan program. So again, there's this set of money that annually we can purchase conflict abatement supplies, and we can use our bear technicians or our wildlife staff when conflicts arise in a timely fashion to respond to them. So in this picture on the right, you can see our longtime bear technician, Nancy Como. She's setting up an electric fence around a chicken coop. So that person had lost, X amount of chickens to a bear that night. They didn't know what they should be doing. Likely that bear was going to return the following night because, again, it had access to this food source. So it was going to take advantage of that situation. Nancy was able to go out that day, set up an electric fence, show the homeowners how it works, that it's effective, and it, then they would have immediate protection of that resource, and it would give them, 2-3 weeks to go purchase their own setup. But in the meantime, their chickens are protected. Other abatement supplies we loan out. In the middle, there's a critter getter, so that's a motion sensor alarm. So that's effective for, bear getting into sheds, getting into garbage. It's not, a permanent solution, but it's something in the meantime to offset that conflict that's going on. We also have a limited number of bear-resistant or bear-proof garbage cans. That one in the picture is actually made by a company out of Berlin, Presby Steel. We have other options down at our office as well, but there's a lot of other supplies depending on the situation that we loan out. But basically, it just allows us to get out to these situations in a timely fashion and resolve the conflict at hand. And I think without this, both this partnership that we have with Wildlife Services and this equipment loan program, I think we'd see our conflicts annually would be a lot higher. We're in a really good spot in New Hampshire compared to surrounding states when dealing with these conflicts. And some states don't have, the management capacity that we have. Other states farther south, like Connecticut, there's no way to manage their bear population. They're getting conflicts in the 2,000 to 3,000, annual complaint range. Where we're seeing 500 to 1,000 with a bear population that's much higher. So I do want to talk for a little while about dumpsters and garbage management, because as Andy said, that is the leading complaint in New Hampshire. The leading cause of conflict is unsecured garbage. As you know, New Hampshire is a fairly rural state. There's not a lot of towns don't have trash pickup. So there's a lot of these dumpsters on the landscape, either at residents, so at homes, or at businesses like restaurants. And as you can see here, so this is your normal plastic top dumpster, and it's easily accessible by bear. So there is nothing that is going to keep a bear out of that dumpster. And it's just another food source that a bear is going to take advantage of. It doesn't know any better. As Andy said, there's times when food on the landscape is very lean, and that's a great food attractant that bear is going to take advantage of. So in these situations, when somebody calls in with an issue like this, bear getting into a dumpster, our first bit of advice is to call their waste management company, because a lot of waste management companies now, especially in New Hampshire, have metal top dumpsters. Metal top locking dumpsters are bear resistant when used properly. And once you cut off the bear's ability to get to that food, to get into that dumpster, that bear will move on. As Andy mentioned, they're a stomach with 4 legs. So if they're not getting food, they will move on. So cutting off access is the first step in any of these food attractant situations. So again, here's an example of one of these 2-yard dumpsters at a residence. We're dealing with a large issue right now in the town of Plymouth. Last year, it really spiked, and I imagine that this year will be the same, but Plymouth is one of those towns that there is no trash pickup. It's on the homeowners to take care of their own garbage. So a lot of them have these small 2-yard dumpsters that get emptied every few weeks. And it's really created an issue because bear can jump from one dumpster to the next, and they're really keying in on these food sources. I was in Plymouth the other week. I was standing in one yard where a bear had been getting into a dumpster, and I could see 5 other dumpsters within sight, all in surrounding homes. So you can see where that causes a huge issue. And you get these bears that are habituated into coming into these residential areas because they know there's a food source. They don't know any better. They don't know that they shouldn't be there. The thing is they're getting access, and that's something that we need to work on to cut that access off. So yeah, the message here is don't trash our bears. Garbage management is something we're working hard on. And I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but Andy especially has worked with a lot of municipalities to pass ordinances on garbage management because, without cutting off access to these resources, there's really nothing we can do. So, that is the biggest thing is, we need to take responsibility for this and cut off access to these dumpsters that bear getting into. So here's some examples of bear-proof containers. Again, here's one of those bear-resistant containers made by Presby Steel. There's other, your normal flip-top garbage cans that you wheel out to the curb every weekend or once a week. They make those that are modified that lock. So bear have a harder time getting into them. These lower ones are those commercial metal top dumpsters I've been talking about. And those are great, but there's a human element. So, they're not going to work if people don't use them correctly. So here, we have a condo complex, I believe it was, that we worked with. They had a plastic top dumpster. They were having bear getting into that dumpster. It was creating a lot of issues for residents. They worked with their waste management company. They got a metal top locking dumpster to cut off access to that food source. It's clearly labeled on the side of that dumpster. The trash should be deposited there. But somebody didn't want to take the half a second to unclip and open that door, so they just threw their trash on top where a bear can still access it. So again, that's not going to solve anything. There's a human element here. Another example of that, one of these metal top dumpsters from the waste management company, but someone left that side door open. So it's not effective. Bear coming and still ripping out all that trash. Here's another example. So, for short term, electric fencing is another option around these dumpsters. Again, not a good long-term solution, but in the meantime, when you have them, can't get a metal top dumpster or waiting to get one, an electric fence setup is effective for keeping bear out. You should probably close the lid. Here's some other options, some bear-resistant options for homeowners. You have these threaded screw-on top trash cans. We have some of these that we've made up that we loan out. These flip-top containers, hard plastic ones that have these locking clasps on each side. And I have loaned those out to people that have been, having bear get into their trash night after night while they're working on a solution. We give them one of these, and I've yet to have a bear actually get into one. So it's been working. Well, a bear technician chained one to the side of a railing on a porch, and the bear pulled the railing off, but it did not get I learned from that. So I do want to get into backyard chickens because, as we talked about earlier, this is the second leading cause of conflicts in the state. And if any of you are chicken, does anybody own chickens?
Not allowed.
Not allowed, okay. Well, we'll talk about it then. So, with poultry, a lot of people are thinking about inclusion. They're thinking about keeping their livestock in, keeping their poultry in. But when you're thinking about wildlife, it's about, thinking about exclusion, keeping wildlife out from getting at those. And the best way to do that is with electric fencing. So, here's some examples of some poorly protected chicken coops. This is something that unfortunately we deal with every year and throughout the year. Homeowners that are, shooting bear because they're protecting their backyard chickens specifically. A lot of this doesn't have to happen. This could easily, be avoided if they took the responsibility and invested in their resource and put up an electric fence, to keep bear out. So, just something that we deal with every year that's unfortunate. So here's an interesting graph. So this is showing reported bear chicken complaints over the last, roughly 20 years. As you can see from the graph, back in the early 2000s, bear chicken conflicts made up a small percentage of, our overall conflicts in the state. Now fast forward to today, and we're seeing, an annual 120 to 150 bear-chicken conflicts in the state. So, this is something that we've invested a lot of education materials into to try to get at these targeted audiences. And a lot of these backyard chicken owners, they don't know any better. So they don't know they need an electric fence. So, it's trying to get to those groups and let them know that's necessary, because this doesn't need to happen. Bears getting killed in protection of chickens, when there's an easy solution. I will mention too that the shooting of sows in chicken pens is a significant cause of cub orphaning in New Hampshire. It happens every year. I can't put a number on it, but every year we're out chasing cubs because a homeowner shot a bear over their chicken coop. And we have to invest significant staff time into catching these cubs. And if we don't catch them, as Andy mentioned, they're completely reliant on their mothers. So they will starve and die on the landscape. So that's the situation that's being caused by these backyard chicken operations. But again, it can all be stopped with electric fencing. It's a proactive and lasting solution. It does involve some upfront cost. An electric fencing setup is $200 to $300, but that equipment lasts a long time and is very effective. Offers 24/7 protection. And here's a short video I have. So this was, not quite sure on the backstory, but it was a chicken coop that a bear had been getting into. The homeowner set an electric fence up and set a camera on that. And this is the reaction when the bear came back to try to get at the chickens again. Hey, how'd you get this to play? Oh, click the next button. So hit that fence, took off in the other direction, and I don't think that bear ever came back. And that's typically what we see for a reaction. Whoops. Some, another fencing setup around beehives, hives, apiaries are another thing that bear get into. A lot of people think it's for the honey, it's for the brood, like Andy mentioned. Bear after colonial insects, and that insect brood is a significant source of protein and fat. There's a variety of energizers on the market today. That technology has come a long way. At the bottom here, these smaller cylindrical AN90 units run off 4 D-cell batteries and last for weeks at a time. You have units that plug into your power grid, plug right into your outlets. Units that run off deep cycle batteries and even solar energizers. If you're getting an electric fence to protect, from anything really, but especially bear, I do recommend you get a fence tester. That's that little device in the center. That'll show you what your voltage output is and also helps for troubleshooting. So, in New Hampshire, well, in general, we recommend at least 5,000 volts of electricity to successfully deter bear. So making sure that your fence has that optimal output is key. I've seen a lot of people that go almost all the way. They purchase fencing, they set it up, but then they forget about it. Fencing does take some maintenance. You can't let vegetation grow into that fencing. It'll ground it out. You won't be getting that voltage output that you had when you set it up. So there is some maintenance required, but overall it does not take much. Some tips on self-help here. Well, so we all know bears getting into bird feeders is a significant cause for conflicts in the state. We have that recommendation that bird feeding, should only occur between December 1st and April 1st. But, really, you need to use some common sense in those dates. They're not set dates. Bear don't follow those. I was already dealing with conflicts related to bird feeders in the Concord area as early as March 15th. So we've been having these shorter winters, milder winters. Bear going into hibernation later, they're coming out earlier. So you need to take that into account if you're feeding birds. When it starts to warm up, you really should be removing those feeders. Because once these bear, get a food reward, like Andy talked about, they will continue to come back looking for more. Again, I mentioned earlier these bear-resistant containers. Garbage needs to be secured. No matter how you do it, it needs to be in a secure location that bear can't get at, because that is, a leading cause of conflicts in the state. Another good thing that you can do is controlling what we call smellables, so adding a cap full of ammonia to bags of trash to cut down on that smell. We all know if bags of trash sit around, especially in the summer heat, they're gonna really start to smell. That attracts wildlife in, and like Andy said, a shed door isn't gonna keep a bear out. Other things, when you encounter a bear, you should always, these are some harassment devices you can use. I always recommend for people who are worried, especially about bear around their house, that they get an air horn. Anything that makes that sharp, loud sound, bear don't like that. That negative reinforcement helps to make them feel unwelcome on the property. You also have pyrotechnics, those motion sensor alarms, banging pots and pans. If you encounter a bear in the woods, in my experience, the only time that I see a bear in the woods is because that bear hasn't seen me yet. As soon as you make your presence known, that bear will go in the other direction. Touch a little bit on community action, but like I said before, we rely on these municipalities to adopt town ordinances and mandate their enforcement. So some of these towns that Andy's worked significantly with to adopt these ordinances are Lincoln, Franconia, Gorham, Bethlehem, and Middleton. Some of these towns that have adopted these ordinances don't necessarily enforce them, so it isn't as effective. But that is certainly something that we need to do more work on, and what we're doing with the town of Plymouth specifically right now, hopefully coming up. Again, homeowners association establishing and enforcing rules. So I'm working with a community similar to this, smaller in size, over in Concord. They're redoing their lease agreements, and they've been dealing with annually these bear issues occurring in the spring because residents are not taking their bird feeders down. So in their new lease agreements, they're talking about adding a clause that states that by a certain date, all bird feeders must be removed. So working with those associations, and also working with state and town health officers. So that I was on the phone with the Meredith health officer the other day because there's a restaurant in town that is bears are being attracted to their dumpster. There are residents that back up to that dumpster that are not, they have no food attractants out, but there are bear in their yards constantly because they're traveling through to get to that dumpster. So in these situations, I advised that they call the town health officer, and he responded immediately, and they will be getting a metal top dumpster, which again will secure that attractant. That bear will no longer be able to get in there. And advocating for state laws that obligate better garbage handling and storage. Here's another example of so this could be a Tuesday morning in any town in New Hampshire. So bear key in on these trash days when everybody's bringing trash out at the same time. Bear tend to, they're smart animals, so they will figure that out. And again, it's about garbage management, putting garbage out at the curb, the morning of trash pickup. If not, you have these issues where these bear are coming throughout town. So, again, it's, we have to take some responsibility. And this is, just completely unacceptable, having these overflowing dumpsters. And, that's causing all sorts of issues, not just bear. So, moral of the story is keep New Hampshire's bear wild, clean up, lock up, be responsible, and coexist. So with that, we will open it up to questions.
Just a reminder that some people sent in questions. If you don't feel your question got answered, then ask it again. And also, I think there were 2 index cards with questions. Yeah, okay. So, do you want to start with those?
Yeah. All right, so first one was interactions. This is still working. Interactions with dogs. So will a bear run away when a dog, or when confronted by a dog? Yes, the answer is yes. The typical times that we see a negative encounter between dogs and bear is when the dog chases the bear and corners the bear, and the bear, being any wild animal, is going to defend itself when cornered. So that is, yes, bear will run away from dogs. Bear are inherently scared of dogs. but it's these times when dogs corner bear, that's when we run into these issues. So the best thing to do there is, keep your pets on the leash when in those areas.
The second question on the index card was, what abilities do you have in Fish and Game to deal with the problem? Relocation? If so, how far? So, we kind of covered this. When I started at the Bear Biologist 21 years ago, we were moving a lot of bears. We wanted to give bears a second chance. We thought it was an option, but we learned over time that it just wasn't a productive way to try to resolve these issues. Bears, as I mentioned, have incredible homing tendencies. They have the ability, I've moved bears that have traveled back close to 100 miles in 3 days. Some with 10-pound cubs, at their heels. So these animals have the ability to make long distance movements, and moving bears doesn't get at the root cause. There's enough bears in New Hampshire that you can move a bear, but if the attraction is still present on the landscape, another bear is going to find it. So we've really moved away from relocating bears.
Yeah,
Here's a microphone.
oh, thank you. Hi, I think some of the bear reports around here have been about a mother and some cubs. And it's my understanding that if a mother has a cub, it will protect the cub from any perceived threat. So a dog, would the mother not protect the cub?
So
Thank you.
I consider, we hear that a lot. Sows are good mothers, but the notion that they're more aggressive than the other bear is really unfounded. What a female bear's typical response is if her cubs feel in danger, she'll tree the cubs, and she'll sit at the base of the tree. She might climb a little bit up the tree, but she'll do her bluff charge. If you get too close, she'll slap her foot, and that's her way of telling. That's a communication bears use between each other. They use towards people. It's their way of avoiding conflict. So, there is no evidence that bears with cubs represent any kind of a danger. They're no more. There's been no evidence that they're any more aggressive than any other bear. But as Dan touched on, it's important to control dogs. If a dog is going to be aggressive towards a bear, one or two things are going to happen. Either the bear may flee and climb a tree, but if it's a real close situation where the dog is able to make contact with the bear, that's going to put a bear in a defensive mode. So it's basically taking what would be a benign interaction and it's escalating it into something more than that. So, it's important to keep dogs under control because they do have the ability to kind of escalate these issues with bears. But, you don't need to fear a sow with cubs. They're not the aggressive animal that media and folklore has kind of made them into.
Yep.
Is it on? Okay, so hold on.
Just a second.
Yeah, there you go. It seems that a lot of folks are very afraid, about their children playing out in the yard and so on with the bears around. Can you help alleviate or explain or tell us if we should be concerned?
So, we should be teaching our kids, now I went down. We should be teaching kids that wildlife deserves space and respect. It doesn't matter if it's a raccoon, we should appreciate seeing these critters, we should respect their space, but you don't need to live in fear. These bears are in our communities because of the foods we're leaving out for them. They're not there to drag kids into the woods. And it's just, if you think about the number of black bears in North America and the number of people in North America and how often the two are interacting and the amount of times that results in human injury, I don't want to downplay it, but it's an insignificant number. It's so small. So, we should appreciate these critters. We should enjoy seeing them, but we should give them space. we should teach kids that, if you see a bear, don't approach. So it's, you don't, it's really an unnecessary fear, and it shouldn't cause people to not enjoy being outside and taking advantage of the New Hampshire landscape.
Right. There's a lot of information out there that, on the web, when I say out there, some personal experience I've had, that they really hate safflower seed. Do you have experience with them finding isolated safflower feeders and going after those?
So I'm gonna have to showcase my ignorance, but I don't really know what safflower is, but I'm assuming it's some kind, is it like a thistle seed or some kind of a different seed?
It kind of looks like, if you shell the sunflower, there's those little white seeds
Okay.
inside, but apparently it tastes very bitter, and to them and to some other animals, so they avoid it. Now, I've had one of these families last year when I had a safflower feeder out, just come within about 20 feet, not even take a look at it.
Yeah.
And
So-
just walk away.
So, the most preferred seed of a bear is the black oil sunflower seed, but with that said, bears are always reminding us that they will take advantage of other food sources. I've seen bears in the last couple of years, due to the lack of foods, eat some items that I never thought they would. Probably the best example is invasive oriental bittersweet. So my point being is, it's similar to the thistle seeds. There's seeds that bears don't go after to the degree that they do sunflower seeds, but the bottom line is, if a bear wants it enough, it'll grab it. So I can't give my stamp of approval that it's a safe seed to put out. The only thing I would say is hummingbird feeders tend not to be a big issue. People hear me okay? Hummingbird feeders tend not to be a huge issue, so if people are hell-bent on putting something out during the summer, probably a hummingbird feeder is okay unless a bear shows interest in it. But any kind of edible seed I would stay away from.
Just as a comment, our hummingbird feeder was attacked last year.
Yeah, so that would be one not to put out. Lots of times it's visual, they're going yard to yard looking for these items hanging. And, so sometimes the hummingbird feeders do get hit. So.
Yeah, thank you very much for conducting this. This has been fascinating. And bears are amazing with their sense of smell. From personal experience, they've come hundreds of yards just because of sunflower seed hulls, no sunflower kernels that I could tell, just because they could smell that from hundreds of feet away from a stream bed that they habituate. And then the other thing regarding the hummingbird feeders, no problems all summer long. October comes along, when they have to fatten up, they could smell the sugar water that had been rained on, but was in the stain of the deck rail. So what I'm going to suggest is you touched upon it, thank you so much, and that would be smell deterrent. You mentioned pneumonia, that doesn't have a residual effect, doesn't last very long with rain. One thing that does work that they use in Tahoe and in the Sierra Nevadas that I've been in for a long time, and that is pine salt. Pine salt has about 7% turpentine. It's residual, and all they do is they put it along the door, thresholds, window seals, even around vehicle door gaskets, not to mask food that shouldn't be there or wrappers that shouldn't be there, but just as an extra measure to mask the smell. So cleanliness is next to not only godliness, but it's really unbearable, and it's really a good idea.
Hi, thank you very much, it was great. What about composting, please? There's been a lot of discussion about composting in our community. some of us compost at our house. I know a bear came to my composter last fall, a small bear. I saw his footprints, his muddy footprints on there. So if you could help us with that, thank you.
Yeah, so my experience with compost is, bears will get into it, but it doesn't seem to be as major and attractive as some of this other stuff we're talking about. So, if you compost properly, obviously avoid, meats and those type of things, but if you compost properly and cover it, it generally is not a major attractant. When it can be a major attractant is when you already have a bear in the community that's used to getting other foods, and then they'll take advantage of whatever they can find. But in a situation where you don't already have a bear that's kind of used to searching backyards for the food, it tends not to be nearly as major a draw as these other attractants that we've talked about.
Thank you. I had a question about the harvest slide. There was bait, there was hound, and there was still. Could you explain what those things are?
Yeah,
Could
so.
you also ask, I know not two questions, but still about bear season.
Yep.
When is the hunting season for bears, and what's the take, and
Okay.
if it changes every year? Sorry.
Okay, no. So there are 3 methods of hunting that are allowed for bears in New Hampshire. That's still hunt. First one is still hunting, and that's very much like the way you would hunt deer, where you sneak through the woods. You kind of learn the feeding behaviors of a bear, and you try to intercept a bear at a natural food source. Baiting for bears is allowed in New Hampshire, and that is a 4 or 5 week season, depending on what part of the state you're in. And then the hunting of bears with hounds is also allowed. So 3 methods. Of those methods, bait hunters have the highest harvest, they have the highest success, and they generally take about 65% of the annual bear harvest, whereas houndsmen take around 8%, so a much lower percentage. Hunting season for bear opens September 1st. And when it closes depends on what part of the state you're in. As I mentioned, the bait hunting season is over by the first week in October. The still hunting season runs into the end of November, because still hunting has a much lower success, therefore has a longer season. And your other question was about
Numbers. What's the
harvest.
take? Yeah.
Yeah,
What's the
so
numbers?
we're at, on an average year, we're taking around 800 bears a year in New Hampshire, and as I kind of touched on, that really changes a lot from one year to the next, depending on food abundance. So on an abundant food year, it's not uncommon to have that harvest drop down to around 500, and on these really poor food years, that harvest can approach 1,200. So, but it's been averaging around 800 a year over the last 2 to 3 years.
My wife wanted me to ask about like raised bed vegetable gardens without attract bears.
So no, your normal growing, vegetable gardens are not going to attract bears. If you have berry bushes that you're growing, raspberries, blueberries, those kinds of cultivated crops, then those would, because that's a natural food. But I have not gotten calls of bears typically getting into vegetable gardens.
This is a camping question. Campers in the room, maybe? Okay. Are all state parks in New Hampshire, do you provide bear boxes?
Most of them do have, not necessarily bear boxes, but these metal top dumpsters that we talked about. So they have secure areas for garbage specifically. But are you talking about?
My food.
Yeah, so your food.
Can I keep it in my car? Will
Yes.
they break into
Well,
my car?
So it should be secured in a cooler in your vehicle.
Okay. Good, thank you.
Thanks on that. Thanks.
No, one question, or
It's not a question, it's a comment on that, breaking into the cars.
What? No.
No,
Unless no one else
let's
has
get
any
questions
questions.
first.
there's a question
No one
back
else.
there.
One question each.
Oh, over there.
They have them up there. You respond to human bear to conflicts.
Yep.
And you don't take the bears and trap them and send them off to the north woods. You have to euthanize them. Is that basically right?
So in those situations where the conflict has risen to a level where the bear needs to be euthanized, we have a protocol. Typically, but yes, we've gotten away from moving adult bears. So if it has risen to that level, then we euthanize them.
And the follow-up question is, how often do you have to do that? And how many do you do a year? Which is something we all are.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's variable, but we don't, have to do it too often. Yeah, 15 to 20 a year. So it happens. So bear killing livestock, bear entering homes and vehicles. Bear in these situations that they're so habituated that they will not leave, an area because of humans.
A question just come up. You have a list of questions up there. Are any of them in there not been answered that you'd like to answer? Because some people did write in.
The one thing I'll bring up, and I apologize if it's not a question, I'm taking valuable time, but I was talking to some folks prior to this, and because Dan and I haven't spent a lot of time here, we don't have a great feel for the condition of your dumpsters and your garbage storage policies. But if you have dumpsters that do not have metal locking tops, I would make that a priority. Some places will put them inside a fenced-in area thinking that's adequate, but bears are great climbers. So you really should have metal locking top dumpsters, and it sounds like folks are kind of responsible for kind of keeping their garbage at their residence until they bring it to a dumpster. In a community this size, I would highly recommend looking into a compactor. And I think if you spread the compactor cost out over all residents, I don't think it would be a tremendous cost. And compactors are great because you can store a lot of garbage in them because they compact and bears can't get into them. But if you're storing garbage in outbuildings and those type of things, you can start to run into some issues with bears, particularly if the bear has learned that a lot of these sheds have garbage in them. So with a community this size, I would be thinking about just kind of ways that you can store garbage more efficiently without running the risk of attracting bears in the future. So.
Okay, I have one question over here. We'll go back and forth. Listen.
A question about memory. When you've got a bunch of bears who have learned that this particular environment is a food source, take away the food. How long will that bear, those families, hang around without the food just because they remember that yesterday or last week or last month there was food to be found?
So bears have great memories, they're very intelligent, but as Dan touched on, they don't spend a lot of time in areas where they're no longer getting food. So it depends on how long they've been doing it. That's a big part of it. Is it a bear that's only been doing it for a summer, or is it a 15-year-old sow that's been in the community for 12 years and living that lifestyle? So it's kind of a hard one to answer, but I will say that starving bears out of communities has to be a community approach. Everybody has to be on the same page, because it doesn't, 95% of the people in this room could be doing the right thing, but if 5% are not, that's going to be enough to keep that bear coming around. And so it really needs to become a community effort. And I guess the other thing I would say is there are places in New Hampshire that deal with tremendous amount of bear issues in the course of the summer, and kudos to you people, because this isn't one of them. You have some bears that are in the community, but you're also surrounded by incredible bear habitat. I'm driving in here tonight, I'm looking at all this green grass, that's prime bear food right now. There's nothing for bears to eat in the woods at this point in the spring, so they're coming to these areas. You have a habitat type here that is different from what bears are finding in the surrounding forest. So it's a unique spot. So you're always gonna see some bears in here once in a while, but you're not gonna be plagued with a lot of conflicts as long as everybody is doing their part in securing garbage and taking bird feeders down.
I suppose that answers why they probably love our golf course.
Now, you have essentially a food plot right now that is it's just ideal bear habitat, but that's not going to result in conflicts.
Sorry, can I just ask if people submitted a question and they don't feel that it was answered, if they could just raise their hand and ask it?
Yeah.
There's a lot to go through here.
Right. Yeah. Are you available to consult with the Eastman Board about what would be good measures to take as a community here? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
What does it take to get you to do that?
An envelope filled with unmarked bills.
Anybody else?
No?
I've been interested in native plantings, native gardens. And so I've spent and so I took a course from Osher, and I've been doing some studying and reading and so forth. Many of the native plants have berries. And so I'm thinking, well, as the last few months as I was over looking at it this winter, I'm thinking, maybe I look at native plants, but not native plants that have berries. Because if I'm planting native plants with berries, even though they're native and they're good for the pollinators and they're good for the birds, but does that mean they're also good for the bears?
So, without knowing what the landscape looks like around here as far as habitat types, generally, when the species that you've planted in your yard, generally when they're producing fruits, similar species in the wild are doing the same, so that bears are kind of overwhelmed with food availability. So under a normal situation, planting some kind of a species in your yard that produces fruits won't serve as a big draw for a bear. When that can change is when you get these unique situations, and ornamental apple trees are a good example. On some of these years where wild apple trees are not producing, but all these ornamentals are because they have full sunlight, they're cared for, they get fertilized, and they produce a bunch of apples, but there's nothing else on the landscape. That's when bears will key in on that. But, I would not, planting things for pollinators is important. So I would not deviate from your desire to do that because you're concerned that a bear might find it. I mean, if a bear's out in your yard eating fruit off an ornamental tree, that's not the type of behavior we're trying to avoid. Our concerns are when they start getting comfortable eating, consistent bird seed and garbage and those type of things. So I would not deviate from your desire to do that because I don't think it's going to result in unwanted bear behavior.
Andrew and Dan, I'd like to thank you so much for this.